webinar. I would like to thank you all for joining us today and taking the time, and I hope you find this session valuable. I'll start with some housekeeping, the usual housekeeping. So if you could please place your microphone on mute, your camera off. We will record these sessions, and both the recording and the slides will be made available on your microsite. Talking about the microsite, you can find it at Net Zero into Scottish Engineering. In there, you'll find all the previous webinars we've delivered to date, 8 of them, and you'll find 2 things with the recording and the slides. So if you go to the slide, then you can zoom through them very quickly, find anything of interest, and if you want, then you can just reach out and we can discuss that in more details. What you also find is what I've mentioned the last webinar, which is we've consolidated last year pillars of discovery and innovations and opportunities, and defined and developed, scaled and deliver the roadmap. So you'll find those are 4 Ds we used, the methodology we used last year during our webinars, and you'll find all 4 consolidated, put together on the microsite. So the program for today is about building a smart roadmap, and we'll focus first of all on what it needs to be. It needs to be purposeful, it needs to be smart, and it needs to be simple. And then we looked at define, and in define we'll use the usual methodology of 5W and 2Hs. So we start first by looking at the why and the what, and then we take a break, and then we finish off the define with the where, the when, the who, the how, the how much, and finally is how do we assemble it when we've got everything, and how do we make it a roadmap, and how do we communicate that roadmap. That's what we will talk about. So first thing first, a roadmap, make it purposeful. And what does that mean, making it purposeful? And then there is a purpose in what we're doing, and the global one is there is no planet B and there is no plan B, and that's what everybody relates to. But closer to home, I think, then if you look at the surveys and the causes that matter, that count, then you find out that climate change is becoming #1 in the UK, and it's above unemployment, which is unusual. The UK is the only country to do that. And there is also a belief that to get there, then what company we need to be involved. Government can't do it on their own, and they are looking for the private sector to make an effort and to move in that direction. So what you're getting here is a strong feeling that the consumer wants it to change. And if you look at the customer, and you take the example of the multinational companies, the big companies, then you'll find out that by 2050, 96% of those are planning to reach net zero by 2050. So that's a huge amount, most of them, of those large companies. And how they are planning to do that, that's 67% of them are going to do it by getting their suppliers to decrease their emission. So you need to remember that in terms of scope 3, and then your downstream emission is your customer upstream emission. So that's what they want to do. So they're putting a strong focus on their supplier reducing their emissions. And 78% are planning to remove those suppliers which are slow to move. So they are looking out for some people to take action very quickly. And if you're not, you'll be removed. And to that extent, they reckon that they're going to cut 35% of their suppliers. So that's the incentive from the customer point of view of why you should move to net zero. Now, they are planning to offer help to those suppliers by giving them a preferred supplier status. And then that would support the supplier in moving to a net zero. Finally, there is a personal side to it for all of us, and it's about leaving a positive legacy. And that's the way you have here, that letter to your son or your daughter. You knew it was happening, you knew it was going on, and this is what you did about it. So you've got the global dimension, you've got the business dimension, and you've got the personal dimensions. So the purpose of the roadmap in there, what does that do? So the roadmap, first of all, is a tool. It's a tool that allows you to address uncertainty, and a tool that allows you to provide direction to your team. It allows you also to align the team to a purpose, which is what we're talking about here, and to communicate that purpose and the rationale, the why. What it isn't, it's a secret. So it's not something you're putting in place because of a lack of vision. It's not something you're putting in place which is very few or limited amount of stakeholders. And it's not something, definitely not something you keep a secret. So when you achieve with a roadmap, you achieve a consensus and an alignment and everybody pulling in the same direction. You break the team silos and you develop a more visual way to see that plan. So as well as talking about it, you've got a visual to it. And all that you're going to be able to communicate. You can communicate the strategic alignment. You can communicate the interdependency between the teams to break the silos. And the plan will come with some tennis events. So that's the purpose of the roadmap. So the takeaway from this is the roadmap as a tool is a tool that allows you to define a purpose, a tool that allows you to achieve alignment and communications. So make it smart, our roadmap. What is smart? I've talked a lot about SMART over the last few webinars, and it's about specificity, being specific, and that's the what, measurable, and that's how much, achievable, and that's who in your organization can deliver on it. Who do you need as a team? That's the interdependency we talked about. The R for realistic or relevant, and that's how. And the T, which is the most important one, but the hardest to nail down, is time bound. So that's why it needs to be a smart roadmap. And those are the color coding I'm going to be using through that presentation. So what we're going to go is look at using that lean tool, the 5W and 2H's. So if you think about the what, what's the what? The what is about reducing emission. Can it be eliminated? No. And that's going to make it specific. The why is about stakeholder value. And does it add value to the stakeholders, not just to shareholders? And that's going to make it relevant. The where, so because you have the why, the where is your boundaries. You'll define the location, and the location is going to make it measurable by defining the boundaries, which will likely be your organizations. Then you'll find you find it to be measurable. The when is the timing, and it's about building that roadmap. And that needs to be smart, and the T making time bound. The who is about the stakeholders in that process. And for that, the question is going to be, do they have the skills? Because if they have the skill, it make it achievable. If they don't have the skills, then we can find out where to get the skills, and we combine two skills as well later on about on the OSF, on the job, social or formal, some process we talked about before. How is about the standards, it's about defining the methodology. And again, that makes it measurable. Once you've got the methodology, you can do the measurements. And how much, finally, is about support, and it's about funding, it's about financial and human resources. And that, again, if it's all in place, that makes it achievable. So that's the way we're going to look at the roadmap, and that's the pieces we're going to put together to deliver a smart roadmap, and then we look at how we can assemble it at the end. So an example of a roadmap or a process for a roadmap, if you look at the greenhouse gas protocol, then you can see how, it is smart. It's smart because it's specific. You choose your target. It's measurable because you define your boundaries. It's achievable because you define your target year. And it is realistic because you choose a completion dates for those various targets, and it's time bound because they all have a time. And it's overall achievable because you need to get, first of all, your leadership involvement, sponsorship, and also at the end, you're probably likely to need some offset because it's very unlikely you reach zero. So you probably need a level of offset. Other way to look at it, if I look at the SBTI, for SME, again, it's the same as SMART. So you select your base year, which makes it relevant, your specific, measurable with your boundaries, your time bound, but your target year, and it's achievable because you calculate those targets, you calculate how you're going to get there. So another different initiative, a different process, but still SMART. Yes, pardon me. The Scottish Council for Development Industry, SCDI, steps to net zero again as SMART is first step, know your number. Then start with the basics. So you will talk about it again, but it's about scope 1, scope 2. Then switch to electric. So it's about moving from gas, and then go green with renewable. So once you've gone from electrics, then go for renewable electricity. And then they really protect the bees and plant the trees, but it's ETS at the end, as we talked about. So again, it is relevant and it is smart. So the takeaway from this part is about, regardless of the methodology you use and regardless of what you're planning to report, you need a roadmap to be smart. Whichever way you're going to go at it, it's going to have to be smart. So example, the key thing is make it simple. And if you chunk it or junk it, and what I mean by that is you take your roadmap, you take the step, you make small steps, and then going forward on that journey. And if you can't break it in small steps, then that means there is something wrong. So that's why you junk it. So this is an illustrative example of a smart roadmap. So first of all, is specific. So it looks at the gas emission, it looks at powers, it looks like a gas, it looks at ETS, it looks at supply chain. So that's what makes it specific. It is measurable, and you can see here what the measures are, or the anticipated measure would be. It is achievable because they are looking at how much ETS they're going to need to use at the end. It is relevant because it's looking at scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, and ETS, as discussed. And finally, it is time bound. There is a plan for it. So that's, again, a very simple roadmap. That's an illustrative example, but it is a smart example. If I look at the roadmap from the Scottish government, they've developed the Scotland Act, which is the Climate Change Act of 2019. And again, here you can see it is specific, it's a Kyoto gas. It is measurable, and you can see what they want to do, 56% by 2020, 90% by 2040, and then 2045, they've reduced by 100%. It is achievable, and for that they've developed the climate change plan, which goes to 2032, and the reason for that is likely to be because between 2032 and 2045, if nothing happens, then they'll be doing something about it and stop using the carrot and using the stick of taxonomy reporting, etc. It is relevant. It's about emission reduction target, and it is time bound. So you can see 2020, 2030, 40, 45. So that's the Scottish government roadmap. And then you can look at big organizations like ITV, and again, you would have specificity, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. So ITV is signing to net zero carbon by 2030. 2030, but a much smaller organization, another example. And you can see again the smart cycling, which is, what is specific, net zero carbon, it's measurable, it's achievable, it's relevant, and stable, and their target is 2030. Now, a lot more complicated. It's not about what it says, but it's about the roadmap itself. And you can see here it's public. So we look at 2 private organizations as a public organization, and it's a lot more detailed. And that's Oxford City Council. It's still a roadmap, it's still smart, it's still time-bound, but it's a lot more details. At the opposite end, Skanska is the simplest roadmap you can get. It also has everything in terms of being smart, but they recognize that they achieve 50% by 2030 through efficiencies, but to get to 100% by 2045, they will need innovation. They won't be able to do that with what they have today. A bit more, I would say, complex or a bit more detailed is Bristol Airport roadmap. Again, smart with all the key attributes. And you can see here it's an organization which is smaller than ITV. It's not a corporation. It's private. It's not public. It's more than a Skanska roadmap, more detailed, I would say. But it just shows you how it can be done with smaller organizations. And finally, you've got the SME Climate Hub roadmap, and that's also a pledge or commitment. And you can see here a lot of companies have made that commitment in the UK, a lot in Scotland. Overall in the UK, it's almost 3,000 businesses. And what is that roadmap? That roadmap is about halving your greenhouse gas by 2030, zero emission by 2050. That's a UK pledge. And every year you develop you communicate your progress. So you can see how a commitment it makes for a smart roadmap. It's specific, greenhouse gas, measurable, your progress, it's achievable. You need to achieve it by 2050, so it's time bound, and it's about emissions, so it is relevant. And there is a lot of businesses. So the takeaway from that is it can be as simple or as detailed as you want it to be. So you go from Skanska at one extreme to Oxford Council at the other extreme. But it should be designed to meet your stakeholders' needs. That's a key part of it. And you may consider the value of a formal pledge like the SME commitment I've just talked about. So why? Start by defining the why. We've looked at the purpose, we've looked at the design, and now it's about looking at the 5 W and the 2 H's, and the first W is why. And it's setting up the vision and the rationale. Why are we doing that? Define the purpose. So the driver is the world is eating up, and there is no way around it. Nobody is arguing against it anymore. So it's how are you going to manage that? So it's a global entity. And if you look at what's happening globally, and you take those data and reference I've just put here on the right-hand side, the probability to exceed 2 degrees C is 90%. So it's very likely we're going to struggle to meet that target. So that's where the opportunity is. We need everybody to pull in the same direction to meet that target. What you can also see here is that there's a lot of government now making commitments, 8 of them, which is quite substantial for a government point of view. And it happens that the UK and Scotland are made that commitment. One, the UK for 2050, Scotland for 2045. So it's now in legislation. So that's the purpose. The purpose is like globally it's warming up, and one of the drivers is globally is driving up, is heating up, sorry. And government have made it a legal requirement in the UK at least. And if you look at the Scottish government ambitions, it's another driver closer to home. And what they want to do is for all businesses to become greener, and that's going to be relevant. And to get there, they want them to have plans And that plan is to include baseline, target, and milestone. Basically, you can see as SMART. Another driver is your competitors' ambitions. The fear of missing out, if you're not doing it, someone else will. And you can see here how like 50% of SMEs have committed to reach net zero. Or they have already done so, but there's a huge amount. And then 34% of those have already got measure in place, how to measure their progress and communicate their progress and display their progress if needs be. So there is a big driver in the sense that your competitor, that's a rational why. And also there is a driver for yourself because there will be benefits. And there is a recognition from SME that 40% recognize that it will provide cost-saving waste reductions, which is quite important at the moment. And 25% recognize that it will allow them to meet the regulations. So I've talked earlier on about the outcomes the Scottish Government wants to see and the relationship, the carrot of funding and investment they're using at the moment, but they may be using the stake of taxonomy and reporting in the future if they don't see the outcome they want. And then that's what that's about. That's about if they come up and start asking for reporting, you'll be ready. So it's the ability to comply with regulation. And last but not least, it looks after all your stakeholders, and I include your customers, your business, which is your employees, and your community where you operate. The other driver, for the rational, for the why, is the opportunity to differentiate. So whereas a lot of businesses are thinking about it, 42% of them do not have a roadmap. So, and if you look at the one that are thinking about it, which is about 50% of them, they either have not committed, but they are thinking about it. So think about the pledge I've just mentioned, or they have committed, but they don't have a deadline. So what that allows you to do, the other driver, is being ready, having a carbon reduction plan, basically having a roadmap gives you an opportunity to differentiate today. So the takeaway from the why, our piece, the relevant thing to do. It's a unique legacy, and it's beneficial to others. And by that, I mean your customers, your employees, the consumer, if you want the customer, because the consumer will drive the customer, the employees, your community where you operate. And finally, if you do know, someone else will, as you can see, SMEs are getting ready. So what's the what? The what is about defining the task and set up your ambitions. So one way to do it is pledge and making pledges, and there is a large number of options out there. But what you need to consider, your recommendation will be look at the stakeholders, your customers, your employee, in a sense, your industry. What pledge makes sense in your industry? Not all of them are relevant. And then you need to look at your resources. How are you going to get there? How are you going to finance these or support these? It doesn't have to be finances, but what are your resources from a financial point of view, from a human point of view, and how you're going to allocate those resources. So that's how you can make it specific. And I'm going to go through a few examples of pledges. And here you've got a B Corp Climate Collective, and that one is a pledge for 2030. So it is time bound, and I look at those times, but you can see here what makes it smart between the pledge, the plan, how you proceed, the scopes you need to consider, and the date. So again, it's all about being smart. That's 2030. The climate pledge is another one, and that one is 2040. But here again, it includes all the smart piece. So being specific, again, measurable, time bound, as I said, 2040. SME commitment, we talked about it. It's about halving by 2030, net zero by 2050, reporting every year. So this one has got a target of 2050. 2050 also would be the race to zero, and it's 2050 the latest, get it as soon as possible. It's about greenhouse gas. And again, you're looking at 50% reduction by 2030. So even if the pledges are different, you can see they are starting to converge in terms of dates. And then you go pledges where you decide what that date is, but it still is like that one carbon world. You still need to measure, you still need to reduce, and you've got, in this case, looking at the offset. So in some pledges, the offset is included, in some pledges, the offset isn't included. Another one is a pledge to net zero, and here they are looking at more how you support your community. And in that sense, they want that every year you either publish a paper that will be influential, or you mentor other businesses around you that you just show them how you've gone there and how they could get there. So it's publishing or mentoring. So it's a different way to look at it. But the most important one for us is this one, which is the Climate Change Act on Scotland, and that's make it legal. And Scotland wants to transition to net zero by 2045. As I said, they've done the climate change plan that goes to 2032, and it's probably to give them, in that plan, there is the outcomes. As I said, if these outcomes are not being met, it's likely they move away from the carrot and move to the stick of taxonomy and reporting. And that's what we need to get ready for. So the takeaway on the specific, on the what, is regardless of the pledge and regardless of the religion, there is a need for a vision, planning, measuring, reporting. So in essence, there is a need for a roadmap. And in Scotland, we've legally committed to be net zero by 2045. So that's a must, and there's a climate change plan, as I said, goes to 2032 to give enough room to take corrective actions if the outcomes are not coming through. So on that basis, I think we'll take 5-minute conference break, and then we reconvene after that. So I think we're going to keep going with the presentation. So we talked about the what, we talked about the why, and now we're going to look at the other W's and the two H's, and we start with where. And where is about defining the location, defining your organizational boundaries. And the good thing is all the standard methodology, whichever you look at it, define the same way the organization. And it's about control. It's about equity shares or financial and operational controls. And most of the organization on the call today and in the memberships are going to be looking at the green one, where they control 100% of the organization they operate in. And by default, then they own 100% of the emissions. So that's the way organizational boundaries are set, and that's the way they are set, regardless of the methodology used. The when is about defining the timing, and it's about setting up time deliverable. And the way to do that, and one suggestion is exponential roadmap initiative. Again, the SME Climate Hub, and it's got 4 pillars. Pillar 1 is about reducing your own emission. Pillar 2 is about reducing the value chain emissions. Pillar 3 is about integrating climate change in your strategy. And Pillar 4 is about influencing, it's about educating, it's about your community. So what you would want to do is start your roadmap by focusing on Pillar 1 and Pillar 2. The roadmap, again, is a live tool. It can be changed as you go. But what we would recommend is to start at least on short term, medium term of that roadmap, is focus on Pillar 1 and 2. What does that mean? Does that mean for Pillar 1 is you prioritize, plan, reduce, review, measure, again, time bound, think smart, of your scope 1 and 2. It's your own emission. So that means looking at your building, your ventilation, your heating, your lighting. It's looking at your waste from your production. It's looking at your business travel, and it's looking at the energy, scope 2, the electricity you buy, gas you may or may not buy. So that's what this is about. And then you look at Pillar 2, which is about reducing your value chain. So that's all the scope 3. And in here, you're looking at your suppliers, you're looking at your supply chain, the upstream and the downstream of scope 3. And you're looking at the design, you're looking at community from your employees, you're looking at product development. So those are all the scope 3. So that's probably what you want to start focusing on your roadmap. Now, if I was to marry the Scottish Government roadmap and the Exponential Roadmap Initiative, it would look like this. So you would have in 2020, 56% reduction versus 2019 of the greenhouse gas from the Kyoto Protocol Agreement. So that's, you've got the base year, you've got a target year, and we'll assume that has been achieved. Then you would look at, by 2030, moving to 75% reduction, focusing on Pillar 1, which is scope 1 and 2. And then by 2040, you gain another 15% by focusing on Pillar 2, which is scope 3, your supply chain. And then for 2045, you achieve 100% reduction, and hopefully there'll be probably some ETS in there. But the way to think about it is to include climate change in your strategy. And by that, you may want to think about circularity. How do you reuse your waste? How do you get value out of waste, for example? So, and finally, you've achieved 100%. It's about influencing your community through your employees, through people working around you, their business, your suppliers, but also influencing your industry and supporting your industry moving forward in net zero. And that would be Pillar 4. So you can see how by marrying the two, we can still end up with a roadmap, a simple roadmap, high-level roadmap, but it is still a roadmap and it is key time bound. So the takeaway from a win from a time is if you cannot measure it, you cannot manage it. So that's why time is part of the measure. It's not only the quantity, it's also about the timing. And a quote from Deming I quite like is, without data, you are just another person with an opinion. And that's why it is key to do all that measurements, all that smart piece I've been talking about. It's about timing, and it's about measuring, and it's about reporting. Achievable is the task owners, and it's about identifying your stakeholders. Who's going to do it? Who's going to achieve it? Who's going to deliver it for you? So the first question in terms of stakeholders is, does your business have the skills? And we've got a very quick skills matrix here on the right-hand side. But what you want to think about is the skills versus the resources. So what have you got? What skill do you have? What resources do you need? And you need to think about proficiency, or seeing the skills and see if you need to upskill or reskill or etc. But you also need to think about interest. Someone may have the skill but not be interested, or someone may not have the skill but have a very keen interest. And then you need to decide those skills. Is that one-off? You need skills for someone to develop a product and that's it. Is that add-on? So you're going to plan some upgrade as you go, and you don't know when that's going to be every so often. Or is that permanent, because that product you're going to develop, you're going to install it, you're going to maintain it, you're going to support it, so you need a skill permanently. So that's a key area you need to think about it. And then you need to think how I'm going to get those skills. So that's the OSF model we talked about in the past. And it could be all for on the job. Think about apprenticeship. Think about upskilling or reskilling of your current workforce. Social is about networking. So this is exactly what we're doing today. And there is more to come. And formal is about the skills provider, in particular higher and further education. But it doesn't have to be education in the sense of universities or colleges. It could be skill providers from your supplier, for example, maybe providing skills, or private organization maybe providing skills. So that's the thing about the stakeholders. Your employee, do you have the skills? And when you look at that, then you're probably going to end up with something like that looks at the skills and looks at the individuals. And in terms of skills, as I said, you want to, what do you need and what level of proficiency you need. And then why do you need it? What are you going to do with it? When do you need it? Do you need it in 6 months' time? Do you need it now? And how long are you going to need it for? Because is it a one-off, or is that permanent? Do you want something you want in a house or not? And the action, so where are you going to get those skills if you decide you need it? And the funding, how much is it going to cost you? And can you find support in the reskilling and upskilling? Remember, one big ambition from Scottish Airlines, no one left behind. And also remember, one of the statements, pardon me, is that employees are keen for being upskilled and reskilled, even if that means doing it in their own time. And then you look at once you've defined your skills, you look at the individuals, and then you look at proficiency and interest, as mentioned earlier on. So those are the stakeholder. And here, and I'm going to show you a few of those during that presentations, is one of the task we're trying to achieve, or we are achieving, is developing the Scottish Engineering Net Zero Roadmap. And what I'm going to show you is some slides on that project, which is because it's a work in progress. But you can see here how, from the stakeholders, you've just put a team together with a project delivery team, which is 5 people, no more, and then a series of forum for all stakeholders. So being the customers, being the suppliers, being the organization itself, and being the team members in the group. So that's an example of the stakeholders, an example of who do you need and is it achievable. So the takeaway is, are the stakeholders skilled and interested? That's the key thing. You need to have both to be able to deliver that. And if you don't, then you rather have someone interested than someone skilled. Manage the size of your delivery team. So I think it's too many cooks per the broth or too many chief line of Indian. So you want a small delivery team with a leader and a sponsor. So that's the people that drive it, a coordinator, and a core team, a small core team. So think about 5, 6 people. But you need to have forums around where you can go and get inputs from all the key stakeholders. And that include your customers, that include your suppliers, and that include your employees and the community. How? The measurable, define the process, select a methodology, decide what standard you want to use. How are you going to do the measurements? Because it needs to be measurable. So how do you do that? So we talked about it, and you can go back to one of the webinars we delivered last year on standards, understanding net zero standards. And we looked at 4 specific standards: the greenhouse gas protocol, the SBTi, the ISO standard, and the PA standards. And the good thing is there is a level of convergence, and they all converge on the principles, and they all converge on the boundaries as mentioned earlier on. But there are divergences between those standards. So even if they all converge on principle of completeness, they've got different scopes. If they converge on the principle of accuracy, the methodology can be different. And if they converge in terms of transparency, again, the reporting can vary from standard to standard. So there is a high level of convergence, but there's also a high level of divergence. And that's why you've got to decide which is the one that works for you. And then you're going to want to look at verification. And in this case, I'm looking at verification from an ISO point of view, but you want third-party verification. And the reason is it provides independence, and it provides you, or it provides the user the confidence that you're doing what you're saying you're doing has been audited by an independent third party. It's not you just saying so. So it allows you to, verification allows you to move away from greenwashing, which is getting bad publicity at the moment. So again, if I take the example of Scottish engineering and about how we go about selecting the standards, it's about, and it's true for any organization, is what makes sense for your business, for your customers, and for your resources. So looking at the specific case, we were looking at the business. Where does business reach? Is it national? Is it international? A lot of our members are part of global organizations, so we wanted something international. So that took the PS out, or you could have a choice of the greenhouse gas protocol, SBTi, or ISO. And we're going through that, so you can go maybe like scopes and scope. So do you want 1, 2, and 3, or do you want 1, 2, and maybe 3? And the maybe 3 just simplify it. So if you want 3, you have an increased complexity, as we know. But 1, 2, and 3 provide completeness. So the simplicity, 1 and 2 only, 3 optional is the greenhouse gas protocol. 1, 2, and 3, which is complete, is SBTi. And we've done that for a few verification, for cost, for offsetting, for what greenhouse gas, is that Kyoto gas, is that relevant? So, and what you can see here is how often the greenhouse gas protocol came through, almost at every topic. So we decided to go for the greenhouse gas protocol because it is international, because it is a reference, they will refer back to that, because it's only the Kyoto gases, because it has guidance and scopes and methodology. In terms of scopes, it has 3 as an optional. It needs to be investigated, but it doesn't need to be reported upon. It looks at offsetting, and it includes offsetting. It offers the opportunity for verifications. And in terms of cost, then you can go and get it verified by a range of third parties. It's not one specific, like the greenhouse gas protocol parties. So it gives you that flexibility. So that's an example of how you go about selecting your methodology. So the takeaway from measurable is, as you can see, there is a lot of options. And here I've just taken a couple of four, but there's even more than those four. Those four are the most renowned one. But what you need to think about is what we looked at is the context around your business. What is your industry expectation? What does your customer expect? And what language do they speak? And what standard do they use? So you don't have to educate them. What you're trying to move away from is customer education. If you've got to argue your case with your customer, it's going to be challenging. And finally, you need to think about verifications and independence and moving away from greenwashing. So that's the takeaway from the measurable piece. Achievable. So look beyond self-resourcing. So it's about the financing, it's about the resourcing, so finance and human. So the first port of call, I would say, is that website, findbusiness.gov.uk. And it's a good website that gives you a summary of all the various options you've got. And it can be filtered. So you can see here, I think a couple of months ago when I looked at it, there was over 500 super options. And you don't want to go through 500 options. You don't have the time for that. So you can filter it. And for example, you could be filtering for net zero, funding, and skills. And you end up with probably 20, 30 maybe options. So something a lot more manageable, but it's a good place to start. So looking at, again, the example of Scottish Engineering, I can look at support for people and people training. I can look at support for the energy sector, the lighting. Think about Scottish Engineering as an organization here. Heating, waste, about the website, which is one of the biggest tools we've got, the most effective tool we've got, and procurement. So you can see how you can go through that and find a series of support. And some of it will be financial and some of it won't be financial, but it is a series of support. So let's give you an example of what you can get out of that. But go beyond the simple support of grants, the funding for business or government organizations or guidance, and look at internally. And internally, one option is R&D tax credit. And not every action, if you want, or every improvement is R&D, but R&D doesn't have to be the blue sky of universities or colleges or research. It can be a step improvement in your process. And what that does is you get basically a tax refund, or you reduce your tax liability, and that allows you to reinvest the amount of money you've had into, again, development research. So R&D tax credit is an option, and we have few members in that sector that can provide support and help in looking at that. But the key thing is sometimes R&D could feel like, oh, that's development blue sky type of thing. It isn't. If you look at maybe improving a current product, as long as it fits into, improving a process, it's got technological, eliminate uncertainty, and it has a level of experimentation, so some steps in there to develop, then you qualify as R&D. So that's one option. The other one is for those of us who are lucky enough to have a patent, is looking at patent box. And if your product has a patent, you may be able, or your product is manufactured with a patent in its manufacturing process, then you've got an opportunity to decrease your corporation tax from 19% to 10%. So that gives you another option. So in terms of resources, you've got the funding support, and that is going to give you access to grants and funding. The challenge here is the administration. That's what you've got to think about. is even if I do get the grant, how much resources I consume to administer and make the claim, etc. And then internally, you would have the R&D and the patent box as two examples of what you want to do. So in terms of achievable, how much in terms of scale is, there is a significant amount of support in our website for skills, especially, and for upskilling, reskilling, and new skills. And I think we're just going through a apprenticeship week at the moment. It is on the job, it is quite key. Funding, again, there is a lot of funding available out there, and you've seen that it's not funding only, but it's a lot of support in that. Actually, the website I've showed you. But think about the timing, think about the administration of it. That's going to take resources you need to think about. And finally, look at your self-financing, self-resourcing, and as I say, look at taxonomy through the R&D tax relief, through the patent box or other option that may be available. How do you free cash? That's what this is about. Now you've done the 5 W's, the 2 H's, you've got all the information you need. How do you assemble that roadmap? And how do you communicate that roadmap? So what we are suggesting is using another lean tool, another lean thinking, which is called the Ocean or the X matrix. And what it starts with is the what, that makes it specific. Then you have the long-term objective and what you need to do next year to achieve your long-term objective and make it time-bound. And then how far you're going to go and how you're going to go about it, where your priorities are going to be, makes it relevant. The how much will make it measurable, that's your KPIs. And the who will make it achievable, because if you allocated the resources, then that means you're going to achieve it. And that's how you get the SMART out of that design, out of that roadmap. And it's all on one page. So how does that look like in real life? So here is a very simple one. Look at the example. So long-term, the specific is reduce material cost by 10%. To get there this year, you're going to reduce it by 8%. That's your year. So your long-term is 10%, but this year is 8%. How you're going to go and reduce that is by developing a strategic sourcing, by developing how your procurement is going to work. And that's what you get through those 3 dots or 4 dots, the connection between one to the next. So you go around, and then the KPI for that would be reducing the number of suppliers by 25%. That's your KPI. And the resources is, in this case, your allocated Gonzalez. So you can see how in that one pager, you've got the SMART piece of it, and you've got the alignment, and you've got the resources. Now, that's the simple level, which is a direct connection. Another example here, which does the same thing, but in addition to that, you've got the complementary piece of it. So what you have here, again, the objective is build a high quality product. That's a long-term objective. And what you're going to do next year to do that is focus on the needs of high-paying client, and that's going to deliver high-quality product. But there's also a complementary, the second objective, which is about achieve excellence in product chain, will have an impact. Now, if I look again at the annual one, it's going to have a direct impact on to deliver it. Sorry. You have to look at your activities. So, and what that means is, for example, activity 1 is modify customer support policies. Will have a direct impact on your annual objective 1, which is to focus on the needs of high-paying clients, which have a direct impact on building a high-quality product. But the indirect impact will be on, for example, implement a video tutorial will have an indirect impact on that objective 1. That's the gray circle around the black circles. And then you can see if you look at the KPI, activity 1 is KPI 1 and KPI 2. That gives me the key performance and the measurable. And the resources, again, who has a direct ownership or a full ownership of the customer service team, but they also have support or indirect support from the management team. So again, you can see how it is specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. And it's all on one page, and it's all aligned, and it's breaking the silos because it's making people accountable, but also shows who provide to that. So if I'm taking, again, a work in progress, Scottish engineering, what is the ambition? So 75% revenue by 2030, if I was looking at the Scottish Government roadmap, that would require obviously scope 1, 2, and maybe 3 by percentages. So what do we do this year to get there by 2030? We need to establish a roadmap, and we need to select a methodology, how we're going to do those measurements. And how we're going to do that is by mapping out our greenhouse gas emission, deciding what is our base year and our target year, and set a target within the 3 months of making a commitment. So once we've made a commitment, then we set a target. So you can see how there's direct connections. The KPI will obviously be scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. And we've got a team put in place, myself as a leader, and then we've got a support team, and we've got sponsors. So that's what you're looking at. So here's an example again of a roadmap. And how you put it all together, what makes it smart, and what you make it align with everybody. So why the X matrix, right? Because it allows you to create a smart roadmap. It's got a few amount of objectives, so it is not everything. You're not going to do everything everywhere all the time. So it forces you to select what matters. It provides alignment. So you know why you're doing things and what you're doing and who's doing it and how you're going to measure it, who's accountable. And there's a link. There is a link between that vision, grand vision you've got for 20, 30, 40, 45, 50, and your strategy and the projects that goes with it. So that's the takeaway from that roadmap. Now, how are you going to communicate that roadmap? So I have, because not everybody wants to go run the Ocean matrix and understand how it works. And I've taken back those examples I had earlier on. And you can see you can go from the Sandscat roadmap, which is hyper simple, very little information in it, to something like Oxford Council roadmap, which is very complex, a lot of details, very detailed, very difficult to read. And what really you need to think about is who is going to be your forum, who is going to be your interlocutors, who are you trying to communicate to? So I would suspect that for your customer, the first roadmap shown at the top left is far too simple. It doesn't have enough information for me to make a judgment. One may argue that the bottom right, the Oxford, may be far too complex. They don't need that level of details. So you may want to go for something like Bristol Airport one, the bottom left, and think about striking that right balance between the two. But that's really how you want to communicate. Who are you going to communicate to, and why are you communicating, and what is the emphasis? Is it on the reduction? Is it on supporting the communities? Is it on your stakeholders, on your customers? So who are you communicating with? So the takeaway from the documentations, from the roadmap summary, and how it can be, this communication, it can be as simple or as detailed as you want it to be, but it needs to connect with the stakeholders. Who are you talking to when you're presenting that roadmap? And is it one roadmap for everybody, or is it different roadmap for different forums? So that's what you need to think about, but it's more about marketing communications rather than actual putting together the smart piece. So to summarize, you look at the vision and the ambitions, and that makes it specific. That's a why and what, and as well as making it specific, to make it relevant. You look at the timing, so you've got your base year, you've got your target year, and that's your when, and that provides you the time bound. And you look at the boundaries, the organizational boundaries especially, and that makes it measurable, that's a where. And the interesting piece is for these, all standards converge. So as long as you do that piece, then it'll apply regardless of the road you decide to take after that. On the principles and the boundaries, all the standards converge. That's a convergence bit. And then that's where they start to diverge. So if you think about the methodology, which makes it measurable, and define out how you're going to measure that, that's where standards start to diverge on their methodology. And then you've got resources, that's your how much, and it makes it achievable, is achieving it by allocating the resources you need. And then you're going to have to track your progress, because you always need to report on how progress you are making against that roadmap. And again, to track that, you're going to need resources, that's your who, and that's again achievable. And finally, by doing it, verifying it against compliance against your claim, what you're claiming you're doing, and your vision, where's your methodology, you're verifying all these. That makes it relevant and allows you to do the communication piece. But again, here, the verification can vary between standards. So that's the divergence bit. So that's why you need to choose. So at the start of it, again, it's all going to apply regardless of the route you're going to take in terms of methodology. Once you decide on methodology, then that starts to have implications on how you develop that roadmap. Again, in terms of methodology, I would recommend that you look at what is accepted in your industry, trying to minimize and avoid as much as possible customer education. So on that basis, I would like to conclude the presentation, the webinar, and open the floor to questions. I would also like to take the opportunity to thank you all for taking the time to attend this morning. I hope you've had value in what you've heard and what you've seen. And again, we are offering a one-to-one service. We're supporting our members in developing that roadmap and how you put it together, and what makes sense and doesn't make sense. So please don't hesitate to reach out, and we're happy to have a one-to-one preliminary discussions, see if we can help, how we can help, and help you get in that journey. So I'll open the floor to any questions.
I've just said if we've got questions to put them in the chat function, or to take yourself off mute and direct any questions to you.
Okay.
Hi, Eric. John Cameron from CB Technology.
Good morning, John.
It's less of a question, probably a question in here somewhere, Eric. But firstly, thanks. That was great, to be honest. I'm not sure people on the rest of the call are like, but for me, I'm an MD of a company, kind of put my toe in the water here, look at it from afar, but this was a clear methodology and approach and a roadmap. This is really, really helpful. So from my perspective, thanks for that. I think my question is, in terms of the support that Scottish Engineering can provide, this is general support, but on a customized basis. I mean, can I reach out to you? Can I have a specific conversation about implementing this into this business? And is that something you can support?
Yeah, so that's exactly what the one-to-one program is about. The webinar program is a bit generic. So it is specific, like a roadmap today, but it's generic because it doesn't really apply to one specific business. The one-to-one program is exactly that, is what are your needs? Where are you on a journey? and how do we help you getting onto that journey? And that may include developing the roadmap, but specific to your need. That's a one-to-one. So please do reach out and we can have a conversation on your specific needs.
I'll put Eric's email address into the chat function for anybody that would like to get in contact with Eric. We've got another question here.
So
Thank you, John.
John, did I answer your question there?
Yeah, perfect. And the follow-up, Sarah, you've answered the question I was going to ask next, so you've already done that. So brilliant.
Eric's email is in the chat function for you, John.
Brilliant, thanks.
We've got another question from Ian Boyle. It says, thanks, Eric. On the subject of standards, what standard is the Scottish Government using?
So they are not using a standard, and that's the challenge. The governments are not hanging their hat onto a given standard. The closest we've got is a procurement notice from the UK government, and that's for any business or any quote or businesses that want to get involved with government money, I would say, or projects, or they want to quote for a project like that. They will be looked at under that procurement notice. The net zero will be looked at, and for that they are looking for a carbon reduction plan, and for that they are looking at the greenhouse gas protocol. So that's the only one, I would say, from a government point of view, that are linking a requirement to a specific standard. And in this case, it's a greenhouse gas protocol, which is not surprising because it's, I would say, the father or the mother of all the protocol. That's how we started.
We've got another question here from Duncan Scott. How would you describe a bad roadmap, i.e. what to avoid?
So for me, a bad roadmap is a roadmap that is missing one of the SMART ingredients. So that's what would be. After that is a bad roadmap would be a roadmap you can't support. You don't have the data to support it, and then you're opening yourself to greenwashing. And then the last bit would be a roadmap that nobody understands or nobody sees. So that would be the key area where I would say the roadmap wouldn't be good.
And we've got another question from Michael Cooper. He says, we currently have an integrated management system. The standards you mentioned, are they compatible with the ISO standards, excluding ISO 14064, of course?
So yeah, that's the one. So if you want to go down the route of ISO because it makes sense, then ISO 14064 is the one we talked about, and that's the one that would match or that would be involved or would be consistent with ISO 14000 and the management system. So again, it's maybe what your customer understands best. As well as that, you need to think about what's good for your business, and the idea that if you've already implemented a few ISOs, then you're used to the PDCA, Plan Do Check Act process, which will be again in line with the 14064 you'll see there. So that's what you would argue. The challenge, or it's not a challenge, what you've got to look out for is because of copyright reason, ISO doesn't have scopes but has categories. But you quickly find out that the scopes and the categories are the same. So they've split them differently, but they're looking at the same thing. So again, it may look like a divergence, but it's actually not that much of a divergence. So that's what you've got to think about. And that's why I'm thinking about avoiding customer educations. You know, if they understand ISO, then that may be the easiest way to go about it.
We've got a question here from Malcolm McKnight also. Malcolm, do you want to take yourself off of mute to ask this question, or would you prefer if I just read it out?
No, I'll ask it. I think it'd be simpler. Yeah, I like this presentation. It's really good. The focus, I think, for me is legacy, because I doubt most people will be in the same employment in 2032 that they're in just now. or even 2045 or 2050. A lot of people will have retired by then. So is the best way to engage with these people getting them to write that letter?
Yeah, that could be a way to do it. Yeah, and that's where I think the Ocean, the X matrix is quite interesting, because you by writing that letter, it's what you're doing next year that's going to influence the long term. That so you've got, you know, the if I go back. If you look at your long-term objectives, so your collector of people will be retired by then, but they are doing something next year, your annual objective, that's going to impact that. So that's that later you just mentioned. What are you doing? And I knew about it, and this is what I've done.
Yeah, so it's short-term, long-term goals, same approach, is getting them to buy into that. That's fine. The other question I have is the ISO 14064 an auditable standard? Like, I know that 14001 is auditable. Is 14064 auditable to the same level?
So it is auditable, it's verifiable. So the ISO is auditable, because all ISO standards are auditable. And if I look at the ISO specifically, that they ask for the auditor to be 14064 Part 3 accredited. So it's not everybody that can audit it.
That's fine. Good answer. Thank you.
I'm not sure if we have any more questions, Eric. I've just said if we have any more, feel free to direct them. No questions in the chat function.
Okay. I think if we finish here and give people 15 minutes back in their time.
Okay, perfect.
And again, you know, it's all going to be on microsites, so the recording and the slides over the next few days or next week. So please don't hesitate to reach out if we think you can help, even if it's for just a preliminary conversation. And thank you this morning for taking the time to join us. Much appreciated. Bye.
Thank you very much, Eric.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Good session.
Thank you.